number you get back, it means you have Node installed in your system. If you get some sort of an error, it means you don't have Node installed in your system. So for the next command to work, you need to have Node installed in your system. So we are going to create our project, or rather we're going to scaffold. So the activity is called scaffolding. So we're going to scaffold our project files using a tool called vite. And to get started, I'm going to run this command. So let me first of all admit this person into the call, whoever it is. And this Jane, is it Jane Itotia? Oh, okay, no problem. I'm usually wondering, ninako nahonga na exclamation mark mahali. I'll try to look into that and see what might be the issue. So for this next command to work, you must have Node.js installed. You don't have to understand whatever we are about to type. In fact, right now you can just cram this particular process, and then later on, as time goes by, we are going to look at that in details. So the command you're going to run is this: npm init vite, like that. Again, you don't have to understand what this command does. For now, you can just write it somewhere, probably cram it, but in like 2 weeks, you're going to understand exactly what this command here does. So you're going to type here npm init vite and press enter. Now, if you're doing this for the very first time, the very first time, you're going to get here a prompt asking you to install that vite tool, of which just type yes to accept it. And in case you're facing any difficulties doing that, please see me after this session so that I show you how to do it. So when you're running this for the very first time, npm init vite, you're going to get here. In fact, you know what? Let me just uninstall vite on my system. Okay, you don't have to understand this command. I'm just doing something here very quickly. That way, we all run. We are all on the same page here. So this is the command you're going to run: npm init vite. This command here, this is the command you're going to run. Ignore the last command that I've just typed recently. So this is the command you're going to run: npm init vite, and press enter. And if it is your very first time, okay, it's not working. But if it's your very first time running this command, you will get a prompt here asking you to install this tool called vite. Just type yes or press Y to accept, and it's going to install that particular tool, this tool here called vite. And again, if it doesn't work or if you're facing any difficulties, please see me after this session so that I show you what exactly we are talking about here. So just a second, guys. Who is Dandon Bovi? Oh, you're here? Okay. So please mute your device. So you're going to run this command here, npm init vite, and then you can see it's going to take me to this interface, and it's asking me for the name of my project. Okay, so I can just say here CSS learning 2, because I already have a folder called CSS learning. So basically, whatever name you give here for your project, okay, whatever name you give here for your project, this tool called vite is going to create a folder using that particular name, and then it's going to create your project, or rather it's going to scaffold your project files in that folder. Okay, again, if you're facing difficulties with this, you can just do it manually the way we were doing it yesterday, and then immediately after this session, or maybe somewhere today in the evening, you look for me. I show you exactly what you're talking about here. So you can see it, I have typed here CSS learning 2, and then I'm going to press enter here. Okay, and it will ask me to select a framework. Just go for this vanilla here. Don't do anything here. When this arrow is pointing at vanilla, press enter, and that is basically what you want. And then use the down arrow. Okay, use the down arrow to select JavaScript, and then press enter. So you can see it has scaffolded our project files into this particular folder over here, and now it's asking us to follow this instruction. So change directory into CSS learning 2. Again, we're going to discuss this as time goes by, and then we run these two commands: npm install and npm run dev. Okay. Once, come again, please. Use roll down vite experimental. Select no for that one. Yeah. So for those who are installing it right now, it's okay. So select no. Come again. It's asking you to. Yeah. Press type yes or something. Just type letter Y or whatever it's asking you to for yes. Has it worked? Yeah. So as you can see, once I get to this step, it's asking me to follow these instructions. So CD, CSS Learning 2. Again, guys, if this is a bit foreign, we will keep doing this time and again, until it will just become a second nature. So CD, CSS Learning 2. So CD in terminal means changing directory. Okay, if you want to move from one directory to another, you're supposed to use this CD command. So I'm going to CD to CS Learning 2. CS Learning Tool, that the way they're asking me to do it, press enter, and then I'm going to run the next command here, npm install. So that is going to install all the necessary dependencies that we need to execute our project. Okay, and once that is completed, you guys are going to see what you're talking about. So we just give it a very few seconds, and it will be done here. And then once it's done, we're going to perform some basic cleanup. And yeah, when we get there, you guys are going to see what I'm talking about. Of course, the internet is a bit down, but once this installation completes, you're going to see what exactly you're talking about. So just give it a few seconds for it to finish, installing the necessary dependencies required to run your project using it. And by the way, guys, I highly recommend that from today moving forward, you scaffold your front-end projects. But currently what you're learning is front-end web development. So front-end web development deals with what the user sees and interacts with. So what you're currently doing here is front-end web development. So whenever it comes to front-end web development and you're trying to set up your project, I highly recommend that you should be using this tool here called vite. So you can see what I have done. I just followed these steps. CD, CSS Learning 2, that is what I've done. And then the next step was to npm install. Again, you don't have to understand these commands. You can literally cram them if you want to. But in 2 weeks, they're going to make perfect sense. Okay? Actually, it's one of the easiest things that we usually do in front-end web development. So after that, you can see I've done here npm install, and it has installed all the necessary dependencies for my project. We will discuss that as time goes by. And now the final step here, the final step is to execute npm and dev. So this is the final step. So run here npm, run dev, and press enter. So this is going to spin a local server in our machine. So it's going to create a very small server in our machine, which we can use for development purposes. And our server is serving our web page on this URL. So if I press Control, okay, I can copy this URL and paste it in the browser. That's 100% okay. I can press I can copy this URL and paste it in the browser, or the damn project that vite has created for us. Again, you don't have to understand this JavaScript. You don't even have to understand any CSS happening here. We will keep learning about this as time goes by. Okay, so we have scaffolded our project using vite, and it has basically spinned for us a local server to serve our web page from. So the advantage of this is the fact that when we develop, for example, when we do our development, our changes will immediately reflect on the browser here without us having to do anything. So for that, let us open our folder here in Visual Studio Code. So here is our CSS Learning 2 folder. So let me open it, and then you're going to discuss the folder structure here. And then after that, you guys will be able to understand what is happening here. So CMD, of course, and then open Visual Studio Code from here. And then we just give it a few seconds. And guys, let me just keep saying this. And I'm not saying this to encourage you or anything. I promise you at one point it's going to be very simple. In fact, if you run that command, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, you'll be more than good to go with it. So for now, if it still doesn't make sense, you can ignore it and do the project scaffolding manually. And as time goes by, everything is going to make sense. So these are the project files that vite has created for us. You can see, as I told you guys, we always need to have our index.html. So for now, you don't need to understand these 2 folders here. You don't need to understand these 2 files, package.json and packagelog.json. For now, we can ignore those 2 files. We will tackle these 2 files when we get to JavaScript development. So here's our HTML file. Okay, as you can see, this is our dummy HTML file here. Not dummy, but this is the HTML file created by vite. We are going to discuss what we mean by this .gitignore. This is a very important file that we didn't cover in the Git session. So for now, we can just ignore it for now. But in like 10 or 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you guys what this file does. Okay, and then now the rest of our code goes in the src folder. So you can see here we have a JavaScript file. You don't have to understand that for now. In fact, I'm going to delete it, by the way. So I'm going to delete this JavaScript file. I'm performing here now some basic cleanup. We have this JavaScript SVG file. I'm also going to delete that. We also have this main.js file, and I am also going to delete that. We don't need this file for now, so move that to the recycle bin as well. And then now we have our style.css, and this is where everything is going to happen from. Okay, so allow me to just get rid of everything here. I'm going to press Control A to select everything, and then delete everything that we are seeing there. Okay, because we don't need any of that code. So even this public directory, we don't have to understand it for now. Let us just ignore that for now. And then this node modules folder, you can just assume whatever is in this node modules folder is what our project here needs for it to work. So if we remove this node modules folder, our project will stop working. But as long as this node modules folder is living here, our project will just keep working perfectly fine. Okay, so again, we will keep discussing that as time goes by. So I just wanted to show you this tool, and I'll keep saying this. If the tool still seems strange to you, you can then scaffold your projects manually, and then we will keep learning this until it makes perfect sense. So I'm going to jump here to my index.html, and I just want to make a change. Let me just delete whatever we are seeing here. I'm going to type here a heading 1 that says hello world, and then I'm going to save this. So it's going to automatically refresh the browser for me, so that I don't have to keep doing that dirty work. So you can see I've typed hello world, and when I open here my browser, you can see our changes already here without us having to do anything. In fact, you guys don't believe me, allow me to just do something like this. So when I see here hello world, this is fun. When I just save this here, you will see, you will notice in the browser that the changes are going to be reflected immediately. So yes, yes. Okay. First question, there is a lady trying to ask. Let's start with the ladies. Yes, so scaffolding is basically creating these project files here. Okay, so you can see vite has done this for us. It has created this public folder for us without us having to do anything. It has done this src directory for us without us having to do anything. Okay, basically when we executed npm init vite, it did all of this for us without us having to do anything. That's what we mean by scaffolding. I did not create this index.html manually. I did not create this CSS file manually. I did not do anything that you're seeing here manually. Vite did that for us. So that is what we mean by scaffolding. Are we together? Yeah, Joshua, you have a question? Oh yeah, I think that, yeah, maybe that has to do with the internet. But yeah, but if you keep getting that error, you please see me immediately after the class or during the short break, and then I'll show you what to do. So yeah, so you can see here, I was typing here, hello world, this is fun. Now look at what happens when I press Control S. When I save that, the change is immediately reflected on the browser. So that is a feature of Vite called HMR, or hot module replacement. Okay, you don't have to understand that for now. We are here to start CSS. As long as this is working perfectly fine, don't worry about it. And now when I go to the CSS here, for example, and try to target the body and give it a background color property set to red. Okay, so if I save that and go back here, you can see we're not seeing those changes, and that is because now we need to link our CSS file here in our index.html. So link, we're going to use link. Rel is equal to style sheet, and then we provide the path to our CSS. So currently we are inside of our index.html. So I want to go into the src folder and then point to this style.css. Okay, so href is equal to // and then src and then style.css. Okay, and I'll keep saying this. If you're still facing difficulties with this, it's 100% okay. Do it manually, and then for us in the class, we will keep doing this and doing this again, and then at one point it will just make sense without you having to do anything. But as of now, you can see this is working perfectly fine. So I just wanted to show you this tool here called vite. Okay, I didn't mean to overwhelm you or anything. I just wanted to show you what we will be doing from today moving forward. So we'll not be going the kienyeji way of new file and then index.html and all of that. No, when it comes to creating our project files, that is specifically creating our project files, okay, we will this tool called vite, at least in the front end. In the back end, we don't have such a tool yet, but in the front end, we have this wonderful tool called vite, okay? And we're going to see a lot of advantages of this tool called vite. In fact, at one point, you'll just prefer to use vite instead of manually creating your files with new file and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is what we mean by scaffolding our project using vite. Now, whatever you have here in .git ignore, whatever you put in .git ignore, Git will be ignoring that particular thing. Git will not version control whatever you type here in .git ignore. So you can see specifically the file is supposed to be called .git ignore. You must name a file .git ignore. Okay, so whatever you have here inside of this .git ignore, Git will not version control that particular thing. Git will not track the changes to that particular thing. Okay, and as you can see, node modules is one of those things. And I'm going to show you guys as time goes by. I'm going to explain why that is the case. So whatever you put here inside of Git, Git will not track it. Git will literally ignore it from time to time. Whenever you do your Git add, whatever, Git will be ignoring that particular thing. Okay, so whatever you have inside of your .git ignore file will be ignored by Git. Git will not bother looking at that particular thing. Okay, so we are done with that. I just wanted to show you guys this wonderful tool called vite, and we will be using that every other time. So let us now look at the CSS box model, which is a very, very important topic, an extremely important topic. In fact, I really want everyone to focus. Don't ignore that vite thing if it's still seeming too complex for you. What you need to understand right now is the box model, because this is the heart of CSS and HTML development. Okay, so the CSS box model is a fundamental concept in web design that defines how elements are displayed and how their dimensions are calculated. In fact, that is the most important thing. The CSS box model is a concept in web design that determines how the dimensions of an element are calculated. Okay, so understanding this model is crucial for layout and spacing in CSS. So this is a very important thing when it comes to layout and spacing in CSS. And by the way, today we're going to cover something in layout known as the CSS Flexbox. Now, the CSS box model is made up of the following items. Okay, so to begin with, each HTML element is treated as a rectangular box composing of 4 areas, or rather comprising of 4 areas. So each HTML element from heading 1 to a span, whatever HTML element you can ever think of, even images, they're usually treated as a rectangular box made up of the following 4 areas. The first area here is the content. So the content is the area where text, images, and other content is displayed. I'm going to demonstrate that in a few. Next, we have padding. Padding is the space between the content and the border. We looked at that yesterday. Next, we have border. So the border is basically around, a line surrounding the padding and the content. And then finally, we have the margin. And the margin basically is the space between the border of an element and the adjacent elements. Okay, the margin is used to add space outside the element, pushing it away from other elements. So these are the 4 components of the CSS box model. Number 1, you have the content, which is basically the area where the content is displayed. We have padding, which is the space between the content and the border. We have the border, which is basically a line surrounding the content. And then we have a margin, the margin, which is basically the space between the border of an element and all the adjacent elements. And basically it adds space outside the element, pushing it away from other elements. Okay, and I think we have a way of visualizing that. If you go here to our example, if I right click on this heading 1, right click and then select inspect, okay, we will basically be able to see that box model somewhere here. Yeah, so you can see anything in HTML is usually represented using the box model like this. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm trying to change that here. So you can see basically this is what you're talking about. So we have the content, whatever you're seeing currently in the blue here. Can I zoom this in? Yeah, exactly. So we have the content. That is basically what you're currently seeing here in the blue. Okay. And then after the content, we have the padding. The padding is basically the area surrounding, the area between the content and the border. And then after the padding, now we have the border, which is basically the line surrounding that particular element, and then we have the margin, which is usually the space around that particular element. Okay, so this is the content. Whatever you're seeing here in blue, in this box here to the right, to the bottom right, and then we have the padding, which is the space surrounding the content all the way to the border. And then we have the border, which is that line now surrounding the content. We saw that yesterday. And then the margin is basically the space outside element. Now, let us continue learning about this CSS box model. Yeah, actually, we have that illustrated here. We have the content, we have the padding, we have the border, and then finally we have the margin. Okay. Now, let us look at how dimensions are usually calculated, because when it comes to CSS, dimensions are very important. Giving our elements width and height is usually the backbone of layout and designing. Now, the size of an element is usually calculated like this. Basically, the total width is usually the width that you have declared. Okay, so the width that you have declared plus the left padding. You can see this very weird behavior. This is the default behavior. Okay, so whenever you give an element a width, that is why I'm telling you guys the box model property is very important. So we usually have beginners who give an element, for example, a width of 30 pixels. And then that 30 pixels doesn't look like a normal 30 pixels. And that is because by default, this is how that particular width will be calculated. It will be actually the width that you have declared plus the left padding plus the right padding plus the left border plus the right border plus the left margin plus the right margin. The same thing happens to the height. You're going to see an illustration of this in a short while. And you can see this is very weird. Whenever you give your element a width, this is by default. By default, this is what CSS will do. It will use that particular width. The final width of that element will be that particular width plus the left padding plus the right padding plus the left border plus the right border plus the left margin plus the right margin. And this is basically a very weird behavior that you never want to see. And basically the same thing happens to the same thing happens with the height. Okay, so whatever we've just seen here, where the total width and even the total height is equal to width plus all the padding plus all the margins and all the borders, is the standard CSS box model. Okay, so the width and height properties apply to the content only. Padding, borders, and margins are added on the top. So this is the default behavior, and the equivalent of that is this property here, box sizing. Box sizing is equal to content box. So let us have this example here, and you guys are going to see what you're talking about. So I am going to have here a div. Okay, when I show you this example, guys, you will just see how it will make sense automatically. So I can just say here a div with the class name of box or something in those lines. Okay, so this box here, I want to give it a width of, let's say, 200 pixels, and let's say a height of the same 200 pixels, and then I want to give it a border of 5 pixels solid red. Okay, so a border of 5 pixels solid red. Now if I go back to the page here and refresh this, you will see we end up having this element over here with the border of 5 pixels solid red. You know what, in fact, allow me to just use a heading 1 instead. It will be easier to show that with this heading 1. So let me just get rid of the box and then target the heading 1 instead. So heading 1, a width of 200 pixels, maybe remove the height, we don't really need it, and then a border of 5 pixels with red, and then I'm going to give it a padding of, let's say, 10 pixels, something that will be easier to calculate. So if I come back here and refresh this, okay, did that really pick? Oh, I was doing here .1, sorry for that, guys. So yeah, so here's our element with a width of 200 pixels, a padding of 5 pixels all around, and a border of 5 pixels solid red all around it. Okay, now you might think, you as the designer, you might think that that particular element has a width of 200 pixels, but jokes on you, it doesn't have a width of 200 pixels. By default, CSS behaves in a very bad way, in a very stupid way. It's going to give this element a final width of whatever width you have declared, plus the left border and the right border, plus the left padding and the right padding. So the final width of this element here, this heading 1, the final width is going to be 200 pixels plus the left border is going to be 5 pixels, because remember the border is being applied all around. So the left border, which is 5 pixels, plus the right border, which is 5 pixels, plus the left padding, which is 10 pixels, plus the right padding, which is 10 pixels. So this gives us a final value of 10 plus 20 to 30, right? Yeah, so this is going to give us a final value of 230. So you can imagine, you as the developer, you think your element here has a width of 200 pixels, but CSS is hiding that element with a width of 230 pixels. Okay, and if you think I'm lying, let us have a div here at the bottom. Let us have a div, just give it a class of box. We shouldn't have deleted it after all. And then our div here with the class of box, maybe we just give it border of, let's say, 1 pixel solid red, and then we give it a width of 200 pixels, maybe just some sort of a height that we're able to see it. Height of, let's say, 20 pixels, just for visualization. So because this box here has a width of 200 pixels, of course we know it's 202 pixels actually. So because it has a width of 200 pixels, you might think that it's going to be equal to this heading 1. But if we go back here and try to visualize it, you can see they're not equal. Okay, so you as the designer, you will sit there and you will be very confused, because you can swear this one here is 200 pixels and this one here is 200 pixels in width. So they're supposed to be kind of similar in terms of width, but look at what is happening here. Okay, and that is because for this top box over here, for this one over here, the width has been calculated like this. The final width has been that particular 200 pixels plus the left border plus the right border plus the left padding plus the right padding. And even this one here, this box over here, you as the developer, you will think the width is 200 pixels, but it's not 200 pixels. It's going to be 202 pixels. Let me just have it here. That way you guys see what I'm talking about 202 pixels. And that is because of the 200 pixels in width plus the left border, which is 1 pixels, plus the right border, which is 1 pixels, giving it a total width of 202 pixels. And by the way, personally for me, before I realized this is how it's behaving, okay, it's not like I realized, before I saw a tutorial showing that this is how it's behaving, I used to suffer a lot. I was literally hating CSS, because you can see in this example, maybe according to the design you're building, those elements are supposed to have a width of 200 pixels and they're supposed to be similar. And for you, you can swear, you can literally show your colleagues your code here that the element has a width of 200 pixels, and even this one here has a width of 200 pixels. But when you go to your page here, this one here is smaller than this other one. So that is because of the standard box model. The standard box model will give your element a final width of whatever width you have declared, plus the left, plus the right border, plus the left padding, plus the right padding. And if you think I'm lying, let us just try to inspect this, and you will see what I'm talking about here. So you can see, if I select this element here, you can see it has a final width of, okay, let me just try it. Yeah, you can see here that H1, it has a final width of 229, of which that is approximately 230. Okay, so you are sitting there thinking you've given it a width of 200 pixels, but this is how it is behaving and under the hood. You can see it has a width of 230 pixels. Okay, can you guys see this H1 229 by 102? Can you see that, guys? Yeah, so you can see here H1 a width of, you try to notice something like this one here. So you can see that H1 a width of 29.33 by 102.67, yet we know very well we gave it a width of 200 pixels. So same case to this other one is going to have a width of course it's supposed to be 202 pixels, but maybe some approximation and stuff. And as you can see, it's basically what you're talking about. Okay, that's approximately 202 pixels. Yet, for you, you know very well that you've given them this width over here, a width of 200 pixels and a width of 200 pixels. But in the browser here, okay, CSS is doing something that is completely the opposite of what you're anticipating. Maybe we should give this one here background color. It's going to be far much better. Background, yes. Yes. Yeah, I've not defined the height. So for the box I've defined a height, because if I don't give it a height, it's going to collapse. Let me show you. If I don't give it a height, I'm not going to see it. Okay, basically you can see it's just a line, but I wanted us to literally be able to see it. Okay, we don't have to give this h1 a height. I told you guys yesterday to avoid giving elements a height. In fact, this height that I'm giving this box over here is just for experimentation purposes. Are we together? Yeah, I was just giving it this height for experimentation purposes. Okay, so you should avoid as much as possible to give your elements a height. By the way, guys, from today in the afternoon, even if everything here is seeming complicated, from today in the afternoon, we're going to start building our own web page. We're going to start building a project together, and all of these concepts are going to be demystified then. Okay, and we are going to put into practice everything we've learned up until this point. So just hang in there. When we get there, you guys are going to see what you're talking about. Okay, so this idea was for experimentation purposes. I basically wanted you guys to be able to see what is happening. Okay, so you can see this element, we gave it a width of 200 pixels, and you can see 200 pixels is not what you're getting. So if you're the designer here, if you're the one building this small web page, you'll start asking your team, how comes I'm giving this heading 1 a width of 200 pixels, and I'm also giving this box a width of 200 pixels, but if I try to look at the output, they are not equal in width. So I've already told you now, it is because of what we refer to as the standard box model. So the standard box model, this is how it's going to calculate the width. So the final width is going to be the width that you have declared, plus the left border, plus the right border, plus the left padding, plus the right padding. So the same thing happens to the height. Of course, I don't have to go to the height. The same thing happens to the height. That is also how the height is calculated. Okay, and that is also basically what is happening here. The final width, as you can see, we've given it a width of 200 pixels. So the final width is going to be that particular width that you have declared, plus the left border, which is 1 pixels, plus the right border, which is pixels, giving us an approximate of 202 pixels. And that is basically what you can see happening over here. So if none of you in your team understands the CSS box model, you might probably think your browser is wrong. Maybe you'll try to install a new version of the browser, but none of that is going to work. Okay, so this is what we refer to as the standard CSS box model, and we never recommend anyone to use this. In fact, if you try to look at any senior CSS developer, they will tell you to avoid using this standard CSS box model. So how do you actually avoid it? So the thing is, the standard CSS box model is defined by this property, box sizing, content box. So this is the standard CSS box model. Okay, but you should always change it to the box model that you're now about to learn, which is now this the alternative box model. So this is the standard box model, okay, which gives people headache before they realize what is actually happening. Actually, I've really saved you guys from this. Trust me, if we did not learn about this CSS box model, and you guys started building a web page, it will give you a lot of headache. You will not understand what is happening, and it's going to be very disgusting. Now we have the alternative box model over here, which is set by using box sizing property set to border box. Okay, so here now it will not be doing those weird calculations. You don't even have to understand the definition, just know it will not be doing those weird calculations anymore. And to work with this box model, which is what you're supposed to be doing all the time, simply use this property, box sizing border box. So now instead of content box, we now specify here box sizing border box. Same case to this one here, box sizing border box. So if I save that now and we go back here to our page, it's now going to be perfect now. So you can now see they're perfectly 200 pixels, because now we're not doing those weird calculations of left padding plus right padding plus left border plus right border. And if you don't believe me, if we try to inspect this, you will also see that it is going to be whatever we have declared there, 200 pixels. You can now see it's perfect 200 pixels and not 230 pixels. Same case to this one here, 200 pixels as we have declared it. Okay, so all of your elements, all of your HTML elements, they're supposed to have this property here, box sizing border box, box sizing border box. Even if I was to put here another paragraph, okay, I'm supposed to make it to be a border box element by changing here the box sizing property to be border box. Now, here comes the thing. You can imagine you have 100 elements on your page. it's not going to make sense to go through all of those 100 elements, giving them box sizing, border box, box sizing, border box. No, that doesn't make any sense. So this is now why we usually do something like this. Yes. To the padding. Yeah, the padding will still be applied, but it's going to be part now, or it's going to be part of the width. Okay. So it's going to be applied. Yeah, exactly. So what I was saying, guys, now, it's not going to make sense to go through all of your elements, to go through all of the hundreds or thousands of elements that you have in your page, giving all of them box sizing, border box, box sizing, border box. But right now I've removed it. That is why we have now gone back to this breakage here. So what we usually do, what we simply do is the fact that we target all the elements. Okay, we target all the elements in our page, and then we give them the box sizing property set to border box, and that now overrides the standard CSS box model. Now everything works perfectly fine. Okay, so everything now works perfectly fine. The calculation is done 100% perfect, and everything is now good. But if you remove that, then you end up having this weird behavior that that is going to be very problematic. By the way, such CSS behavior is what usually makes people to hate CSS. By the way, guys, let me tell you, developers hate CSS, and I don't want you to be, part of those developers that hate CSS. And it is just because of these behaviors, and that is the reason why we usually say learning your fundamentals is very important. Okay, so developers really hate CSS, and that is, basically because of this behavior. Because you can imagine, it's your first time learning CSS and you don't know anything about box sizing, border box. Maybe you skipped your fundamentals, or maybe you just ulipitia CSS to juju, so you don't know anything to do with this box sizing, border box. Now you're building your own project. You give your H1 here a width of 200 pixels, and then you give this box here a width of 200 pixels as well. But when you go to your page, they are not equal in size. And before you realize this is actually the behavior, you've already developed a very negative attitude towards CSS. So now, in all of your projects, okay, in all of your projects, from your next project moving forward, your first line of CSS should always be this one here. Before you do anything, come again. Before you do anything, you should always have this line of CSS here, this piece of code here. You target everything, and then you set the box sizing property to the border box. Now that you're here discussing border box and margins and paddings, there is one thing I want to show you guys. By default, we learned about block elements and inline elements, and we said block elements, they take up the entire width of the parent element, and inline elements, they don't take the entire width of the parent elements. They only take up the enough space that they need. Now, another thing you're going to notice about block elements is the fact that by default, CSS will give them some sort of a margin. So remember we said that margin refers to the space around an element. So you can see this heading 1 here, which has this red border. It has some margin around it. We have some margin here. Let me just try to zoom this in. We have some margin here to the top, some margin to the left, and even some margin to the bottom. And sometimes that tends to mess up with our design. Okay, because you'll be giving your elements your own margin, but CSS has already given it some default margin. So that is a behavior that we never want as well. And that is the reason why we also target all the elements and remove all the margins. So margin 0. So this has nothing to do with box sizing. It's just something to do with block and inline elements. But before I save it, you can see by default all your block elements, they're going to have this default margin. Okay, and when you start doing your own designs, those margins are going to make your life to be very hard. Okay, because you'll be giving an element a margin of, let's say, 20 pixels, but if you try to look at the final margin, it's something more than 20 pixels. And that is because by default, CSS gives these elements, okay, not really CSS, but the browser gives these block elements some default margin. So that is the reason why we target all of those elements and remove all of those margins by setting margin property to 0. So if I now save this and I go back here to the page, you can see all of those margins have been removed. And now you can now do your margin here manually. So I can now give this one here, for example, a margin to the bottom of, let's say, 1 rem. like that. So if I save it and go back here, you can now see that one rem margin to the bottom has worked. Or even you can just say, for example, 1 pixels. Okay, so I want 1 pixels margin to the bottom, and basically that is this thin line over here. So maybe according to the design that the UI UX team has sent you, this line here should be very thin. The margin from this heading 1 to this box over here should be very thin. So if you don't remove this margin over here, if you don't remove this default margin here, you'll get this weird behavior where the margin, okay, for now it's working, but I thought it was not supposed to work. But for now, just know you're supposed to remove those margins. I don't have anything to say about it. You're supposed to remove those margins. So that is very important to understand the CSS box model. So we have the content box and then we have the border box. So you should always make sure you're going for this border box, which means your very first line of CSS or your very first block of code of CSS should always be this block of code over here. Okay, so today in the afternoon, we'll start a new project and you guys are going to see exactly what you're discussing here. So let me just zoom this out back to 100% like that. Any questions regarding box model? So this is where, this is the backbone of layout and design in CSS. If you want to cram this part over here, do so, but make sure at the end of the day you understand the CSS box model. Okay. Okay, I think Duncan is really hanging right now because you are not in when you were starting out. I think Kina Joshua and the people you're sitting with, they're going to be explaining to you things that might seem a bit strange to you. Okay, and by the way, anyone who's facing issues here, anyone who's facing difficulties with understanding what you're learning, please reach out to me, and then we will see what to do about it. If there is any concept you'd like to be repeated, I'll keep saying this, just let me know, and then we'll create time for that particular concept to be repeated. Now let us look at this CSS display property. So the display property in CSS defines how an element is displayed on the page and determines the layout behavior of the element and its children. Okay, so the common values for the display property are block, inline, inline block, and none. So let us just start with this first four over here: block, inline block, and none. So for the flex, grid, inline flex, and inline grid, we will look at those later on. Okay, so for now, let us just look at the block display, inline block display, and the none display. And I'm going to discuss what they do right now. Now, the block, when you use the display property, and you set the value to be block, it will make that particular element to be a block level element, taking up the full width of its parent container. Okay, so when you give an element this block property over here, then if you give an element the display property set to block, then it will make that particular element to be a block level element. This is very important. I want you guys to look at what you're about to do here. So we know very well that an anchor tag, for example, is an inline level element. Okay, we can just have here an anchor tag, okay, that says, let's say here, home. Okay, another anchor tag that says about us, another anchor tag that says maybe blog, another anchor tag that says our team, maybe one more anchor tag here that says pricing, something like that. So we know very well that an anchor tag is an inline element, of which inline elements usually take up only enough width that they need. As you can see here, for example, home, it's only taking up enough width that it needs. Same thing to about, blog, our team, and even pricing. Okay, so home, about us, blog, our team, and pricing. You can see they are inline elements. They're only taking up the amount of space that they need. They're not taking up the full space, and they're not starting on a new line. So you can change that behavior using the display property. So the other day I told you we would look at that. So I can target that anchor tag, for example. I can target all the anchor tags and give them display property here set to block. And now all the tags in my page, okay, at least the anchor tags that I have selected, the elements that I have selected here, they'll now be treated as block level elements. So now if I go back to the page here, you can now see they're taking up a full width now of the parent element, and they're starting on a new line. So that is the display property set to block. It will make your element behave like a block level element, even if it's an inline level element. And we'll be looking at this, by the way, guys, in a short while. In fact, we're coming back to this anchor tag, and I will use it to explain something very important. So, okay, the parent element in this case is the body. Okay, the parent element in this case is the body. So you can see all of these anchor tags and this div and even this setting one, they are the children of this body over here. So remember when we were talking about nesting, we said when you put an element inside of another element, then the containing element is what we refer to as the parent element, and then the contained element is what we refer to as the child element. By the way, guys, I want you to ask me questions like that. That way we are all moving together. So if I was, for example, to cut these anchor tags here and put them inside of a div like this, then the div in this case would become their parent. Okay, so the div in this case would become their parent, and now the div is now the parents of these anchor tags, and these anchor tags, they are children of this div. Brian, you wanted me to repeat something? Okosawa? Okay, let's see, just a second. Nothing changes, as you can see. So what you're talking about is the fact that the display block property makes an element to behave like a block level element. You can see by default, if I remove this styling here, if I remove that styling, by default, our an anchor tag is an inline level element. It only occupies enough space that it needs. Okay, maybe just to make things make sense here, I can target this div here, which is now the parent, and give it a class of, let's say, a parent to mean the parent of these anchor tags. Okay, I really want you guys to see what is happening. Okay, sorry for that. So maybe just give it a width of, let's say, 500 pixels and a border of 2 pixels solid green, just to see what is happening. So save that, and if I go back to the page, you can see that is our div. So you can see by default, an anchor tag is an inline element. It's only occupying enough space that it needs, and it is not taking up the entire width of the parent element. Okay, but now if we target these anchor tags, okay, if we target all of those anchor tags and give them the display property set to block, and maybe just to see what is happening, give them, okay, before we give them a display property set to block, let us just give them a border of 2 pixels solid, let's say purple, just to see what is happening. Okay, you can see for now they're only taking up as much space as they need. Maybe give this element some padding, that way you guys can really see what is happening here. A padding of 10 pixels or something. As you can see here, the anchor tags, they're only taking just enough space that they need, okay, because they are inline elements. Now, if we were to change, okay, just a second, guys. Rules of engineering. Rules of engineering. You have passion for it. But this is great. You know, I have a cousin of mine. As we speak, Angel was born in Egypt. This is very well. As we speak now, he's a profession. So it's possible. It's a good thing. And that person really wants to compete him. I think he's going to consider postgraduate. It's a massive now. For example, we go to start nonsense of sense information systems. We want to convert to computing. I'm going to go through that program. Yeah, it's good. I think it's good to follow your passion. They're good. Which course are you taking? Oh, you stay around? You're renting? How old is available? What's the very age? You know, you're staying in a hotel because you must be. It's like 500 bob on a daily basis. But home is where? What does it actually this thing? Yeah, even in this one, even in Development, even in Chuka, Bengo University, everything in customers. Yeah, but you can move it. Yeah, and Taraka don't change. Okay, I hear the discourse. Come to this. But is that it? Now I know why you're rich. Now I know. Yes. Okay. It's one more person. Oh, okay. It's okay. Okay, I see. Amazing. So, now this field. How do you find yourself here? Amazing. So, what are you papi? Sing out. Out. With it. Yes. Out. Yeah. Ni challenge. Mkatafuta tu nyumba mahali. Hakuna nyumba. Been here for actually last week we moved to Chile. Last week. Because we are looking for a home. Yeah. And we have people here. What you do? Now actually the next option. Yeah, which is okay. Which I think is cheaper than that option. Yeah, but now the class is again. Yeah. I was just here. For example, is not good. You know, this is a traditional place. Past some time, there are things you can do past some. You can go long to second floor.
But weekends. Yeah. So weekends, there's a lot. Yeah, sure. This weekend. Even with Sagana. Can you go to Sagana? Or this year, Morocco? Or no, there is an entrance. Yeah. Or even you can go even past just about we call it. Someone. Yeah, no, you guys, your sister. What's on your piano now? Umekubeja. What will happen next year? Who's going to trees? What will happen next year? Because we're going to have a bigger intake. They have been on it at this time now. Yeah, they have been. They have been, but on it this time now. Double. Before us being around 2,000 something, now it's almost 5,000. So you can imagine 3,000 students. It's a whole community. So, yeah, but think about it. I think it's hotel. But think about weekend resources. Yeah. After? Yeah, definitely. That time is too late. Yeah. Even if you want, there's a lot of noise. Yes. What do you feel if you feel you want to support them? So, yes, but we have a kind of plastic that yeah. The lunas of this. We also. No, I mean, when I was here, not here. Or you introduced yourself. Or you introduced yourself. Dr. Dia was here last week. So there were people who were not here. Dr. Dia came to see us. Were you there? Oh, because they got you easier. Oh, easy. Introduce yourself. I know this place for you. Yeah. It's cost. Chocha alikuwa sindio? Chocha alikuwa George. Chocha alikuwa even Linus. Okay, we should see. Of course. I'm competent teaching. Your assignments. You never know what this may translate to a job immediately. Somewhere. So, because today's work, they're asking what do you have? Not like what you have. Because what you have, you can give us papers. Senior? Yes. But what do you? What do you? Yes, you can see you have this certificate. So, I think that's one aspect of this course. Just to talk to make you. So, apart from challenges, we need a challenge. Because I agree with this people. I think what has happened is such lots of numbers that I try to work on it. Connect to work it. That's how that can be solved. But I'm trying to work out the dynamic to this yes. You see, the process is not in my hands. So also, I also report. Yeah. So, yes, just like this.
Okay, that is not an idea to handle. It's going to handle. Yeah. I already talked to Joshua about it, and I was going to tell you guys that it's doing that. I think from tomorrow. So, yeah, we know we're already 1 week behind. That is why we're really forcing. That is why we're really pushing. Not really what was said last week, but most of you guys have got issues like communication, and even those guys who were not able to move forward because of the internet. You can ask them. It was literally impossible to have any class. So we're trying to cover what you also missed last week. So, yeah, but that is, in fact, inafanga tusome kutoka 9 mpaka 1, and then in the afternoon you guys do some sort of a practical. Yeah, you basically practice what you learned. So, yeah, so it's something I know about. We definitely.
But I'm maybe to understand. But of course, past 5 is difficult. It's a place because some people we can't sleep anymore. Still, because that means it must be staff. Because we are the challenge. That's the challenge. Because okay, fine, then I wish you the best. When you have a challenge, you always communicate to me. So it's Madam Dr. John here. You can help the teams to form it. Also, you will help the school to give you a master's. You have Master of Science in Computing, Master of Science in Computer Science. You will go to PhD. Actually, this school is very active for we graduated the highest numbers with PhDs. I graduated 6 PhDs this year. All IT and computer science. Next year, I'm going to have even more. Because we are trying to, raise the banner high. So, okay, I wish you something.
This is spend 1,000 on a daily basis. And still buy lunch, supper, and breakfast. Ona simuorganize na watu wako na manyumba tayari na lodge. Jojo afanye simuorganize hawa kupatia namba ya lango nyingine. Unaona kiacheka. Wako na mob kila Saturday. You did not tell me. So kulipata ni caretaker ama wewe ni caretaker? But so when you say our wengine it was not. Yeah. No, it doesn't have to same core to 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay. You guys will know how to survive. Okay, it doesn't have to be 2 bedroom. Wanaume tunanga mtu mingi. Sasa hata 1 bedroom wanaume. Hata single room they just yeah. Yeah. No. Okay. Let's continue, guys. Let's continue. Yeah, I know. Training is also yeah. Of the class. Oh, meeting imesha yenyewe. Oh, okay. Sorry. It's okay. Okay, let us continue. Let us hope they fix the internet. Can you guys see my screen? Okay. So, what you were saying, by the way, guys, I'm very much aware of the practicals. Okay, I'm very much aware of the practicals, but don't worry, we will get to that. Okay. In fact, we can even have next week, Monday and Tuesday, we have no classes. You guys will just use the entire 2 days to put everything we've learned together. So, sawa. Yeah, so I'm very much aware of that. Even if you want some sessions to be repeated, we will do that. So I have given this anchor tag a border of 2 pixels solid purple, those anchor tags. And if we try to look at our, sorry for that. If you try to look at our final output here, you can see basically they're anchor tags, they're inline elements. They're only taking up just enough space for them to be able to, just enough space for their content. And that is because they're inline element. So we can convert them to block elements. You can convert an element from inline to block using the display property, okay, set to block. So when you set the display property to block, what you will see now is that now they are not behaving like block elements. They're taking up the entire width of the parent element. Of course, the space you're seeing around here is padding, so don't let that confuse you. But as you can see now, they're taking up the entire width of the parent element. Okay, so that is basically what you need to understand about the display property set to block. So when you give an element a display property set to block, it will make that particular element behave like a block level element, taking up the full width of its parent container. So as you can see, we also have the same example here where we converted them to block. And now the inline property does the opposite. It will make an element behave like an inline level element, okay, which makes it to be only as wide as its content without starting on a new line. Now, if you try to look at our example, we have this H1 here, which is a block level element, because you can see it's forcing every other thing to start on a new line. This div here, which is red in color, is also a block level element, and even this div here, which has a green border, is also a block level element. Now we can set the display property here on this heading 1. Okay, we can set the display property here to be inline, and that will make it an inline level element. We can also set the display property on this one here to be inline, and it will make those two to be inline level elements. So the heading 1 will be inline, and even this box here will be inline, which means they will only take up the amount of space they need, and they will not be starting on a new line. So if I save this and get back here to our page, you'll see that is basically what you're talking about. Of course, this one here has collapsed, and I'm going to explain why later on. So you can see here we have our very small div, which we've given it a display inline, and then we also have this div over here, this H1, which we've also given a display property set to inline. And even this a.parent here, we can also give it a display property set to inline, like that. So if I save this and we go back here, yeah, of course, we have space issues, but as you can see, all of those 3 elements are now inline. Or maybe even better, let me just get rid of everything we have here and also get rid of everything we have here. Okay, we can have a heading 1 here saying hello world, and then another heading 1 here saying how do you do, and then maybe one more heading 1 that says CSS is fun. So we know very well that a heading 1 is a block level element. So a heading 1 is a block level element, a block level element, a block level element. Now we can turn them to inline level elements by simply targeting them with this H1 selector, and then we give them display property set to inline. Okay, before I save it, for now you can see they're block level elements, which means they're taking up the entire width of the parent container, okay, of which the parent container currently is the body, whatever we are seeing here on the screen, and they are all starting on a new line. But all of those heading 1s, we've given them a display property set to inline. And now when I save this and try to look at the page here, you can now see they're not block level elements anymore. They are now inline level elements. So that is something you need to understand, and it's very important. Now here comes another thing which is very important in design. I want to have here some anchor tags which are inline level elements. Okay, so we can have home, about, maybe services, and then contact us, something like that. So home, about, services, and then contact us. So if I come back to the page here, you can see, yes, we have our anchor tags and they're inline elements. Now, this is really a bit confusing, but let me try my best to explain it. Inline level elements, they don't have they don't have their own margin and even their own padding. I think it's supposed to be margin, not padding. So inline level elements, they don't have their own margins. Okay, so for example, this element here, our anchor tag, if I try to give it, to give them a margin, let's say to the right of, let's say 20 pixels, I'm not sure if it will work. I hope it doesn't work that way. I'm able to explain. Okay, it's actually working. Okay, for now, just understand one thing, that inline level elements, they don't have their own margins and their own padding. When we get there, guys, I'm going to show you what I mean by all of this. For now, this example here has worked. I was thinking it was not going to work, but when we get there, I'm going to discuss that. So for now, it's okay if it has basically worked. So for this flex and grid inline display, we can leave them out for now. So that is it about the display property in CSS. I don't know, do we really need to look at this position property in CSS? But this is also a very important topic. Okay, we'll come back to this one later on. We have in our project, there is a place where we use something in this line. So we will come back to this sometimes later. I'm trying to rush so that we cover as much content as possible. Do we do shadow effects? Okay, let us tackle shadow effects. Okay, so CSS shadow effects add depth and dimension to your web design by creating shadow on elements. And these shadow effects, they include box shadow, the text shadow, and the drop shadow. For now, I'm only going to look at the box shadow because, again, I'm trying to save time here. So the CSS, the box shadow property, applies shadows to the outer frame of a box-like element. Okay, so the box shadow property applies shadows to the outer frame of a box-like element. And this is how it works. You basically use the box shadow property, and then you pass the offset in the X direction. I'm going to discuss that right now. The offset in the Y direction, the blur radius, the spread radius, and the color. Okay, let us try to do that practically. That way, everyone understands what is happening. So we want to have here a heading 1 that says hello world, like that. So let us now use this heading 1 to learn the box shadow property. So we've said you're supposed to use the box shadow property and then pass the following values: the offset in the X direction, the offset in the Y direction, the blur radius, and the spread radius. Actually, guys, you don't even need to learn anything about CSS box shadow. There's a website. You can just search for box shadow generator. Okay, and you'll get a lot of tools online that will help you to generate CSS box shadows. There are hundreds of such tools. So I can click here on box shadow generator, this one here. Okay, so box shadow generator, and you can see what we mean by a box shadow. So when we say offset in the X direction, it is basically this horizontal shadow length. So when I try to, for example, change this, you can see that is the shadow in the horizontal direction. Okay, the next property here, sorry, not the next property, but the next value I'm supposed to pass to this box shadow property here is the offset in the Y direction. So the offset in the Y direction is basically the vertical shadow length. As you can see, that is the shadow in the vertical direction. Okay. Next, we have the blur radius, which is the blurring effect, where higher values create softer shadows. So the blurring effect of this particular shadow here. So if I try to increase the blur effect, you can see the blur effect of that shadow. Okay, and what you're saying is the fact that higher values will create softer shadows. You can see how soft our shadow here is, and when I go for a very small value, you can see how sharp the shadow is. So if you use a higher value, you basically have a very soft shadow, and if you use a smaller value, you can see the shadow becomes kind of sharper as we continue going on. And then finally, we have the spread radius. The spread radius basically means the shadow size. Positive to expand and negative to shrink. So if I increase the spread radius, you can see the shadow becomes bigger. If I reduce the spread radius, the shadow becomes smaller. So increase the spread radius, decrease the spread radius, increase the spread radius, and decrease the spread radius, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if you want to work with the box shadow property in CSS, you can literally search for a box shadow generator, and you will get this tool. And by the way, that is true for almost all other properties in CSS that might seem a bit complicated. Just search for whatever it is generator in CSS, and then you'll get it. For example, I can search for linear gradient generator. Okay, yeah, CSS linear gradient generator. And when I press enter, I'm going to get here some websites. So CSS gradient generator. So you don't have to do some of these things manually. Okay, you can see here we have a linear gradient. And the good thing about these tools is that they give you the code. They don't just generate and then look at you as if, you can see here, for example, we get the code over here. Okay, so for now, just ignore this thing, WebKit, I don't know, M or Z and all of that. Just copy the first line, and that should be your box shadow. So for example, here, I can copy this box shadow, and then of course, I'm coming to discuss it, and then use it here on my heading 1. So heading 1, and then I give it the box shadow property. And as you can see, we have offset in the X direction, offset in the Y direction, the blur radius, and the spread radius. So if I save this, and I go back here to the page, you can now see our shadow here. Of course, this shadow doesn't make any sense. Let us try to go for a shadow that makes sense here. The spread radius, okay, maybe, I don't know, the spread radius. Let us just refresh this website so that we start from the absolute scratch. Okay, so a vertical shadow length, that is okay. I think this is still okay. Maybe the blur radius, yeah, I think this shadow makes sense. So I copy that particular line, okay, and then I use it in my design here. So a box shadow of whatever this value is. And if I save that and go back to the page here, you can now see my heading 1 has this nice shadow beneath it. So you can see it's adding this perspective, this 3D-ish perspective to our design, and that is thanks to that particular shadow. So back to what I was discussing, some of these properties in CSS, you don't have to write them from scratch, especially if you not understood them. So for example, for a linear gradient, you can literally search for linear gradient generator, and you can see you get, a lot of websites, probably hundreds of them. You can see that website there. We have that other website there. We have that other website there. It's literally a lot of websites here. Okay, so for example, for this one here, I can basically, play around with my gradient. Okay, so I'm changing the size of this orange here. Okay, like that or something in those lines. And then of course, somewhere here, there should be some sort of a code. And you can see here, we get our code. So I can copy this code, okay, and maybe use it, I don't know. I don't know if it will work on this heading 1. Paste it there. So when I save that and go back here to our page, you can see our gradient is working perfectly fine. So just search for whatever it is generator. I can even search here for, yeah, I have an idea. Let us use this linear gradient on the body instead of there. So body, background, linear gradient, then those vibrant colors there. By the way, they're very beautiful colors. As you can see, we have our linear gradient. You can even search for radial gradient generator. So just a second. Radio gradient generator. And if we wait for it, so let us look for, okay, I think maybe it's just the same websites, but maybe there is some sort of an option to select you want a radial gradient. Yeah, you can even see this website here. Okay, if you want it to be a linear gradient, if you want it to be a radial gradient, if you want it to be conic, okay, and then you can even change the directions, right? Radial, and even change the direction, and you can see it's working perfectly fine. And of course, at the end, there is somewhere, there must be somewhere you can get that CSS. So I can copy this to get CSS, to get the CSS, and then use that CSS in my body here. So just a second. So paste that here. And then, of course, remove these attributions. They're not that cool. So if I come back here, you can now see what we end up having. Okay, so you can just search for whatever it is you want, and then you'll be able to get it. Okay, so yeah, that was it about box shadow. The offset in the X direction, you've seen the idea. The offset in the Y direction, the blur radius, the split radius, and you can even change the color of that particular shadow. So for example, in this case, we can even change the color of this shadow. And I told you yesterday, guys, about the RGB function. So I can even go here for, let's say, a blue shadow or something. Why is it not picking? You can even see here we're going for a red shadow. Okay, I can even go for a blue shadow, and you can see now we are creating this neon effect, which is a very popular one. Okay, if I go for this greenish, you can see we get this greenish effect here. In fact, let us try to use that on our heading 1 here. Okay, so heading 1, you can even give it a width of, let's say, 100 pixels or 400 pixels with a border of 1 pixel solid, let's say red, and then we now have a box shadow. Okay, I think green will make sense now that you are working with green here. So save that, and if we go back to our page, you can see we end up having this nice, whatever that is. Yeah, so that is it about the CSS box shadow property. Any questions up until this point? Okay, so we are moving well. We are almost done here. Okay, of course there are a lot of things picture juju because maybe we'll not be them in the near future, but as time goes by, we will come back to those concepts. In fact, after we cover these three, transitions, animation, and custom properties, we'll now move to a very important topic called CSS Flexbox. Extremely important, very, very important. And then we now start working on our own project. Okay, I feel like we've been doing a lot of just learning and learning and learning. So sometimes we need to apply what we've learned. Okay, so 2D transformations. CSS 2D transformations modify elements by translating, rotating, scaling, skewing, or even combining these transformations. Okay, now they are applied using the transform property, allowing for rich visual effects. As 2D transformations, they include the translate property, the rotate property, the scale property, scale Y, the scale property, the skew property, okay, and so on and so forth. Okay, let us start with the first one here. It's that position to somewhere else the page. Okay, so the translate property, it moves an element from its current position in the page. And this is how you use it. You use the transform property, and then you pass distance to move your element in the X direction, and the distance to move your element in the Y direction. So I can come here, and for example, on our heading 1 here, I can give it a transform property. So now we've said all of these 2 transformations, they're applied using the transform property. And you can see we have a lot of them. We have matrix 3D, of course, none. We know what that means. I don't need to explain it. Perspective, rotate 3D, rotate X, rotate Y. We have lots of these transitions in CSS. So I'm going to start here with the transform. With the translate one here. And as we've seen, it takes in 2 values. The distance in the X direction, the distance in the direction. So for example, I can say I want to move the heading 1 200 pixels in the X direction, and let's say 500 pixels in the Y direction. So if I save this and go back to the page here, okay, you will now see it has been moved that distance. It has been moved 200 in the X direction by 500 pixels in the Y direction. Maybe I can just try to save to change this to something like 200 pixels by 200 pixels. And now our heading 1 here has been moved 200 pixels in the X direction and 200 pixels in the Y direction. Okay, now let me open Excalibur because there is something I need to explain. That usually trips a lot of beginners in CSS. So in mathematics, if this is your Cartesian again, okay, if this is Cartesian mathematics, this is usually the X direction. Sorry for that. This is usually the X direction, and this is usually the direction. And this is usually the positive and the negative in the X direction. This is in mathematics at least. And then in the Y direction, the top part is the positive, and then the negative, the bottom part is the negative. So basically in mathematics, if you're moving from left to right in the X direction, you're basically incrementing. And in mathematics, if you're moving from top to bottom, okay, you're basically incrementing. But now in CSS, it's a bit weird because in CSS, in the Y direction, it's usually shifted. So if you move in the negative direction, you're basically going to the top, and if you move in the positive direction, you're basically going to the bottom. So that means if I try to do here negative 200 pixels, I'll be pushing it to the top. And if I do here negative 200 pixels, I'll be pushing it to the left, because remember, this is the X direction and this is the Y direction. So if I do here negative 200 pixels in the X direction, I'm basically moving it to the left. And if I do negative 200 pixels in the Y direction, I'm moving it to the top. So don't confuse this with the mathematics Cartesian plane. This is CSS. So if I save that and go back to the page here, just a second, you'll now see it's basically what we have discussed. Actually, it has actually been pushed out of the page. So 200 pixels in the X direction and in the Y direction. So maybe we should just use 200 pixels in that direction. Of course, it's still outside the page. 200 pixels by 200 pixels. Yeah. So maybe I should try to just move it slightly, negative 20 pixels, and that will be a bit to the top, as you can see. If I try negative 30 pixels, okay, I'll be moving it to the top. So you can see it keeps going to the top. If I try negative 40 pixels, as you see, it keeps going to the top. But if I give it positive 40 pixels, it will now be going to the bottom, like that. So that is the transform translate property, which is used to move an element. Now you can also pass one value to the transform to this translate property, and that particular value will be used in both the X and the Y direction. So if you pass one value like that, transform, translate, and then pass one value like that, then it will be the translation in both the X and the Y direction. Okay, we have too many websites opened here. So if you pass only one value, then it will be the transformation in both X and Y direction. And then you can also have translate X like that. And I think we also have that. I don't know why I'm not getting auto completion. Just a second. Translate X. Yeah, you can also see we can also have translate X and then translate Y. So you can pass something to translate X, and that will now happen only in the X direction. And then you can also pass translate Y, and that will now happen in the Y direction only. We have the rotate property. Don't need to explain that. That one will rotate that particular element. So you're supposed to pass a value in degrees, and degrees is supposed to be DEG in degrees. So I can say here, for example, I want to rotate this element 45 DEG to mean 45 degrees. So if that, and I try to look at this here, you can see the element has been rotated 45 degrees. Okay, and of course, if you want to move it, you can also have the the translate property, maybe 50 pixels. Okay, but it's being moved maybe 100 pixels in both directions. Yeah, so as you can see, we can also have both properties. Okay, so 200 pixels maybe by, I don't know, 500 pixels in the other direction. Okay, that is taking it out of the page. But either way, you can see what the rotate property does. To avoid confusion, let me just remove this one here. So I was just trying to show you that you can also have multiple values. You can have translate and rotate. So you can see what the rotate property does. It basically rotates your element. Next, we have the scale property. So the property, sorry, not property, but value. The scale value does what it's saying. It will scale your element. And of course, when scaling your element, you're supposed to pass a ratio, not a value that has some sort of a length unit. So don't pass here scale 12 pixels. No. So you're supposed to pass a ratio. For example, scale in the ratio of, let's say, 2. Okay. So if I transform scale 2 and try to look at it, okay, sorry for that. You can see this element has been scaled to that size basically. So it has been scaled to this size. Maybe I should try something here a bit more realistic, maybe 1.2. Okay. So originally, if I remove this scale property, originally this is what it is looking like. Maybe I should give it a margin to just place it at the center of the page. So margin 200 pixels, like that. So originally this is what it is looking like, but if you want, we can scale it. So transform scale 1.2 like that. You can see I'm passing a value in ratio, and you can see it's being scaled. I can also pass here transform scale 1.5, and now that is going to be a bit bigger. And if I pass here, for example, 3.5 times, it's now going to be even bigger than what we have, as you can see. And then, of course, you can also scale in the X direction only. So, for example, you can scale here 1.5 in the X direction only. Okay. And now you can see it's being scaled only in the X direction. It's even losing its aspect ratio here. And then if you want, you can also scale in the Y direction only. So scale Y like that. And as you can see, we're scaling it in the Y direction only. Okay. What next do we have here? So scale X and scale Y, we've already seen those. Next, we have skew X. So this one here skews an element. Okay, we have the skew properties, of which for that we have skew and skew Y. So those two properties, they skew an element along the horizontal axis. Okay, so I can come here, for example, and say here, transform skew X. And for the skew, you're supposed to pass a value in degrees. I think you guys, you did all of this thing in mathematics in high school, where we were rotating, not CSS, no. I'm saying these properties here. We were rotating elements in mathematics in high school. We were skewing elements and so on and so forth. So if we come back here, we can see what skew will look like. Okay, so that is skew X. If I pass here skew Y, if I pass skew Y, this is basically what skew Y will look like. Okay, and then if I just pass here one skew property like that, that is what the skew will look like. Next we have, what do we have next? I think that is basically it about it. So we'll keep looking at those as time goes by. And now, before we take a short break, I want us to look at CSS custom properties. Very simple and very straightforward. Okay, so custom properties, which are also referred to as CSS variables, or custom properties, which also sometimes referred to as CSS variables or cascading variables, are entities defined by CSS authors that represent specific values to be used throughout the document. Okay, we're going to look at that in a short while. So complex websites have very large amounts of CSS, that is, and this often results in a lot of repeated CSS values. Yes. So for example, it's common to see the same color used in hundreds of different places in style sheets. And changing a color that has been duplicated in many places requires search and replace across CSS files. Okay, that is just a use case that I can explain manually. Now, this is what we're trying to talk about here. If I, for example, just look for any website, which website here? Maybe that one for the random CSS, maybe box shadow generator. So if we try to look at this box shadow generator website here, just as an example, okay, you can see this blue color. It's being used in multiple places. So the blue color is being used here. The blue color is also being used here. The blue color is being used on this value here, 10 pixels. Okay, and if I keep scrolling, you can see, okay, this is a variation of that color, but you can see it's still either way that blue color, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine you're the one working on this website for a particular client. Okay, so you're the one working on this website for a particular client, and then they give you, they tell you that their primary color is going to be blue. So you end up setting these colors manually: blue here, blue there, and so on and so forth. And then in the future, your client just wakes up on a random morning, and then they tell you, hey, I don't like this blue color. I want to change it from blue to, let's say, red. Now you have multiple places to change this color. You'll now have to change from blue to red here, same case to here, to here, to here, and all of these other places. Okay, maybe we can just try to have here some sort of a practical. We try to have a heading 2 that says this is fun, and then maybe a paragraph with some dummy text, lorem 10. Okay, so this heading 1, we can, so color set to red. Okay, the heading 2, we can give it a red color. This is primary color of the website you're working on, or something in those lines. So color red as well. Save that. So if we try to look at our website here, that is basically what we have: a red color here, a red color here, and finally a red color here. Okay, so what if in the future the client decides they don't like color red and they want to change their primary color from red to, let's say, black. Now you have multiple changes. Now you have multiple places to change this. You now have to go to everywhere where you have red and change it to black. Okay, where you have red and change it to black. Where you have red and change it to black. Okay, and change it to black. And you can see this is going to be a lot of weird work, because of course if you go to the page it's working, and the example might seem a bit light because you only have 3 elements, but you can imagine if you have 100 elements in page, you are using color, so it's going to be a lot of work. And this is now where CSS variables come into play. Okay, also referred to as CSS custom properties. So custom properties allow a verb to be defined once in one place and then be referred in multiple places, so that it's easier to work with. So in our case, okay, let us look at how to define a CSS custom property. So CSS variables are defined with a CSS rule, typically inside the root pseudo class. We're going to look at that in a short while. And then a custom property is prefixed with 2 hyphens, followed by the property name, like this one here, for example. So you can have your own property and your own value. So a custom property and a custom value. And we've said typically you do it in this root element. Okay, so let me show you what you're talking about here. So I can have the root pseudo element. We're going to discuss what pseudo elements are. So yes? Come again? Oh, okay. If I'm back, it's okay. So the root pseudo element like that. Okay, and this is where you define your CSS custom properties. So for example, this color that is being used in multiple places, we can have it, for example, call it color primary, and call it and have a value, for example, like black. But these custom properties, they're supposed to be prefixed with 2 hyphen symbols. So a hyphen, and then color primary like that, and then you can see that is black. Very simple and very straightforward. And to use your custom property, to use your custom property, you use the var function. So var, the var function like that, and then you specify the custom property you want to use. So for example, in this case, I want this color primary. So even here, so var and then color primary, and even here, the var function and then this color primary. So if I save that and I go back to the page, you will see that everything will still be working perfectly fine. Now, the advantage for this is that in the future, if the client decides to, misbehave and say we change the primary color from black to purple, well, I'm only changing it in one place. Okay, so I'll just do it in one place and it will basically be reused across all of these other places. And if I go back to the page, you see that it's working perfectly fine. Again, this is a very simple example. That is why it might not make much sense. But when you start building complex websites, you now start seeing it in its full glory. So this is how you define a custom property in CSS. You use 2 hyphen symbols and then whatever name you want for your custom property. Okay, I can even have here another custom property. Let's say this website belongs to Lean. So you can say here, Lean website color secondary. You can see, you can name your custom property whatever you want. So maybe my secondary color, is, let's say, magenta or something in those lines. Okay, so now to use it, it's very simple. So color, okay, maybe we can have the color to be that, but maybe to also have a border, 2 pixels, solid, and then variable Lean's website secondary color, of which that is going to transform to this magenta. So same case to this one here, for example, border, 2 pixels, solid, var, and then Lean website secondary color, of which that will translate to this magenta as well. And finally here, border, 2 pixels, solid, and then of course that particular variable. And if I go to the page here, you will see that is basically what is happening. So if it tells us she doesn't like this magenta color, maybe she likes black, so we don't have multiple places to change it. We only do it in one place here. Change this from magenta to black. So if we save that, you can see it's just one change and it's being reflected across everywhere it was being used. Boys and girls, that is what we refer to as CSS custom properties. Okay, CSS custom properties. Yeah, and then of course you use the var keyword. And if you want, you can also provide fallback values. So for example, here, we can say lean, website color secondary, or let's say, I don't know, magenta or something. So in case this one here does not work, then this one here will be the fallback. We will fall back to that. So for example, if it doesn't exist, okay, you will see it will fall back to that magenta. So I really hope you guys are getting the idea. Very simple. As you can see, our variables are being defined in the root element. And by the way, if you also want, you can define that particular variable inside of the selector itself. Okay. For example, I can say here, I want a variable called width, because look at this, guys. If I want this element to be a circle, I'm supposed to give it a similar width and a similar height. Let's say a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. Okay, not a circle really, but a square. And if I go back here, you can see it's working perfectly fine. But if I want to change the dimensions, now I have to change the dimensions in multiple places because it must be a square. So I have to change here from 400, okay? And then I come back here again and change this to 400. And as you can see, that is a lot of work. So for that, I can also define here a local custom property. Of course, they're supposed to start here with a hyphen. So you can say here hyphen, hyphen, and then size or something, whatever you want, and then have our 400 pixels. So of course, to use it, we use the var function and then our size. Same thing here, the var function and then the size. And if we save that and go back to our page, you see it's working. Now, if it comes to changing, we are only now doing it in one place. Okay, I can change it to 250 pixels and you can see I'm only doing it in one place and it will basically be reflected here. Let's take a 15 minutes break. 15 minutes and then we should be back here by 11:30 for the next part. this is like a gonna folder inaitwa CSS. Looking hivi inamaanisha maana anytime you put a folder as forward slash hivi inamaanisha kuna folder inaitwa CSS. So you need to do si lazima uko na folder but kama uko na folder which is highly recommended, you make sure you mention that folder. Yeah. don't need to set for an account, but you need to take and do so by running git config user.name, and then I think double quotes maybe username yako. So hii username I highly recommend iwe inafanana so kuna GitHub account. So GitHub account yako, username ya GitHub account yako match na username. So you'll do the same for email. Git config global user.email, and then within double quotes your email address. So the same GitHub, the same email you're using on GitHub should be the same email. So if you have any question, it was doing well. I'm waiting for some minutes. Project management is sample. Then of course we then yes. Use roll down by step 7 install it npm yes. So node will run for backup. It's not like a yeah, exactly. Also, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So you go some. Yeah. So you have maybe back and the URL. So you control and then click on that URL. Then yeah. Control click control. Copy it and yeah. Control left click of course. Yeah. Control. Press control and then click, or you can even copy it, but control click is easy. If I copy, then I paste it to Mozilla. Yeah, it will open. Yeah. Okay, let us proceed, guys. Let us continue. Hello, can you guys hear me? Ati? Oh, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen, guys? Okay. I want us to learn a very important concept in CSS, and that is the concept of CSS Flexbox. Okay, so this is very, very, very important, extremely important. Whatever you're doing right now, put it down. I want you guys to focus on what you're about to learn here. Now, Flexbox is a module in CSS that makes it easy to align items to one another in different directions and orders. Okay, so Flexbox is a layout module. I'm forgetting that name. You're supposed to say it's a layout module. So Flexbox is a layout module in CSS that makes it easy to align items with one another in different directions and different orders. Okay, so the main idea behind Flexbox is to allow the container to expand and to shrink elements to best use all the available space. We're going to look at that in a short while. Now, Flexbox is used to build one-dimensional layouts. Again, I know you don't know what you mean by a one-dimensional layout, but you're going to look at that in a short while. So Flexbox is one of the two layout modules that we have in CSS. So whenever you want to lay out items in CSS, because so far, whatever we've been building websites where items are just, ordered the way we place them in the page from top to bottom. But now with Flexbox, we can, change the layout of how our items are appearing on the page. So Flexbox is a module in CSS that makes it easy to align items to one another in different directions and orders. Now, Flexbox is used to build one-dimensional layouts, and we're going to see that in a short while. Now, before we start looking at Flexbox, there are very important terms here that I want us to start by covering. Okay, so the element on which you use Flexbox is known as a flex container. The element on which you use Flexbox is known as a flex container. That is very important. So make sure you know this particular name, flex container. I want you to notice I'm not saying container. So container is another jargon that we usually use in design, of which we will learn about all of those jargons today. So the element is flex container, not container, flex container. The element in which you use Flexbox is known as a flex container. Now, to change an element to a flex container, we set its display property to flex or inline flex. So, of course, this inline flex will create the flex container that behaves like an inline element. And again, guys, we're going to see that in a very short while. Actually, while we go through this, let us first of all scaffold our project files. Of course, there is no need to do this. I should have just used what we had previously. But because I want all of us to basically move forward together, let me just scaffold a project using vite. That way, all of us are on the same page here. So as I said, you're supposed to open your terminal or your command prompt from where you want your project to live. And then you're going to run this command here. You're going to run npm init vite, like that. So npm init vite, and then press enter. And then it's going to start to walk you through a series of questions to help scaffold your project. So the first question here is the name of your project. So for me, I can just say here, Flexbox Learning. Press enter, and then it will ask me for a framework, of which I'm supposed to select vanilla. Okay, at one point you'll be selecting React. Okay, if you're using Svelte, you can select Svelte. If you're an Angular person, you can select Angular, and so on and so forth. But for me, I'm using vanilla JS, so I'll just select here vanilla, and then JavaScript, like that. And then as you can see, it's giving me this instruction. So to cd to Flexbox Learning, and then run npm install, and afterwards to run npm run dev to spin up the local development server. So cd Flexbox Learning, like that. Let me just clear the screen here, and then run npm install. So that has nothing to do with Flexbox yet. We are just setting up our project where we will be coding. So while that is happening, let me go back to what we were discussing. We were saying the element in which you use Flexbox is known as a flex container. Again, guys, there is nowhere I'm saying it's called a container. A lot of students take this. Flex container and container, they don't mean the same thing. Okay, so when you see somebody in his code writing using a class name like container, don't sit there and get confused that this particular person is, using Flexbox or something. No, the element on which we use Flexbox, the element on which you use Flexbox is known as a flex container. This is very important. And to change an element to a flex container, we set its display property to flex or inline flex. Okay, now when you give an element a display property set to flex, that particular element becomes a block element. Okay, so for example, even if it is a div, even if it's an anchor tag, even if it's a, I don't know, a span, as long as you give it a display property set to flex, then it immediately becomes a flex container, and all its children, oh sorry, not a flex container, yes, it becomes a flex container, but it becomes a block level element. When you give an element a display property set to flex, it becomes a it becomes a block level element. Okay, and of course it's a flex container now, and then all the children of that particular element, they become inline level elements. So all the children of those particular elements, they become inline level elements. So again, if you have an element and you make it a flex container, the moment you make it a flex container, then that particular element itself becomes a block level element, and all of its children, or rather all the children of a particular element, they become inline level elements. So to change an element to a flex container, we set its direction to flex, or you could use inline flex. So inline flex will make your element to be a flex container, but that particular element will behave like an inline element. So we're going to see that in a short while. So you can have your element and then you give it a display property set to flex, or you can also give it a display property set to inline flex. Okay, so the element on which we use Flexbox is known as a flex container, and to change an element into a flex container, we give it a display property set to flex, and then all the direct children of a flex container are known as flex items, as we're going to see in a very short while. So in fact, I'll do practically right now. So all of our dependencies here are installed and everything is okay. So I'm going to run here, but before I run that, allow me to copy this path. Okay, and then npm run dev. So press enter, and there we go. So yeah, here's our project, and I want to open it in Visual Studio Code. So cmd, as I taught you guys yesterday, and then code that particular path. So this is what we refer to as a path. So press enter, and it should open Visual Studio Code in that path. Okay, and I told you guys, it's a good idea to perform some basic cleanup. So in the SRC, we don't need this counter.js, we don't need this javascript.svg, we don't need this main.js. They are useless and irrelevant for now. So move those to recycle bin. And then in our style.css, we want to get rid of everything here. Okay, at least now you guys know what root pseudo element is. At least you know some of the properties that we have inside here. So get rid of everything here as well and save that, and then link our CSS file in the HTML. You can see how that process is simple, but of course, if it's your first time, it's going to look so complicated. Okay, so for those who are still having trouble linking their CSS file, you just need to know where your CSS file is. So in my case, my CSS file is inside of this SRC directory. And remember, when we say directory, we are basically meaning a folder. Folder, directory, it's one and the same thing. So in Linux, they call it directory, but in Windows, we call it a folder. So my CSS file is inside of this SRC directory. So starting from the current folder, I want to go into the SRC directory, and then in the SRC directory, I now have there my style.css file. So yeah, that is more than cool now. So what I'm going to do here, I want to have a div, and then inside of this div, okay, this div is going to have a class of flex container. Okay, so I'm calling this div flex container, and then inside of this div, I want to have other divs, okay, with the classes of let us just call them 10, and I want 10 of them. So this is an emmet thing. I hope it's going to work. So this is an emmet thing, and I showed you guys where to get all of these emmet cheat sheets. I mean, all of these emmet cheats. Okay, so I have here a div with the class of flex container, and then inside of it I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, around 10 other flex items. So save that, and then I want to do here some very basic cleanup. Remember, we said the very first thing you're supposed to do is to target all the elements and then remove all set the box sizing property to be border box, and also remove all the margin like that. Then I want to target all of these items here. I want to target all of these items, these divs here. Okay, so I want to target each of those items, give them a width of, let's say, 40 pixels and a height of also 40 pixels. We could have used a custom property for that, but of course, let us just start simple. And then maybe a background color here of red. Okay, so if I save that and we go here to our page, you can see there we have our elements. So maybe to just give our body here padding. Whoa, what did I say? So our body, we give it some padding, because remember, guys, we said that the padding property is what we use to put some space between a container and its children. So body, we give it a padding. Sorry, we give it a padding of around 20 pixels. I think that should work for now. Yeah, a padding of around 20 pixels, like that. And then the boxes themselves, we give each one of them a margin of around 10 pixels. So if we save that, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10. And then, of course, the apparent, this flex container here. So we are still setting this up. We're still setting things up. Whatever we've done so far has nothing to do with Flexbox, okay? So whatever we've done so far has nothing to do with Flexbox. So the flex container, we can give it a background color of, let's say, bisque. This bisque color over here. I don't know if it will be visible. Yeah, I think that's far better. Great. So now we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 10 boxes here. Maybe we can just put some numbers, that way we're able to see what is happening here. 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10. Great. So now we're more than good to go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to the 10 boxes. So now what you are saying is this. Okay, where is that flex box? What you are saying is this. If you want to convert an element into a flex container, okay, so if you want to convert an element into a flex container, we set the display property to flex. And this is what we said. When you give an element, the display property is set to flex, then the element itself becomes a block level element, and then all of its children become inline level elements. Okay, so here in this case, as you can see, I have this div here with the class of flex container, and it has all of these children, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. Now, when I give it a display property set to flex, then what will happen is that the element itself now becomes a flex container, of which it becomes a block level element. Of course, by now the div is still a block level element, but the element itself becomes a flex container. It becomes a block level element, and then all the children become inline level elements. So if you go back to our page here and try to look at that, you will see exactly what we were discussing. So this, whatever you're seeing here in this bisque color over here, that is what we refer to as our flex container. We've given it a display property set to flex, okay, and now it's a flex container, and now all the children inside of our flex container, they become inline level elements. You can now see they're only occupying the amount of space that they need. Okay, they're only occupying the amount of space that they need. So that is our start there. Where is that? Yeah, so we've seen about the flex container, and then we've seen about the flex items. So all the direct children of a flex container are referred to as flex items. So whenever you have a flex container, so in this case, this element here that has this bisque color, that is what we refer to as a flex container. And now all of its children, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10, these are now the flex items. Okay, so all the direct children, why do I keep opening this page over here? So all the direct children of a flex container are referred to as flex items. So those two important terms are very important. Okay, so those two terms are very important. The element on which you're using flexbox is referred to as a flex container, and all the direct children of a flex container are referred to as flex items. Very important. Okay. Now, when you give an element a display property set to flex, so for this I will need Excalibur. If we were using Zoom or Microsoft Teams, it would be easy to demonstrate here. But when you have an element here that is a flex container, so in this case, this is our element here that is a flex container, the moment you give it a display property set to flex, okay, CSS draws these imaginary lines on that particular element. Of course, for you can't see, but you need to create that mental model in your head. Okay, so CSS creates a line running from the top to the bottom, and then it creates another line running from the left all the way to the right. Okay, so okay, just a second, let me try to resize this. So the line that is running from the left all the way to the right is what we refer to as the main axis. So this one here is the main axis. The main axis. And then the line that is running from the top to the bottom is what we refer to as the cross axis. The cross axis. So the line that is running from the left to the right is what we refer to as the main axis. And then the line that is running from the top to the bottom is referred to as the cross axis. So those are two other important terms. Now, all your elements are usually laid across the main axis. Okay, so all your elements are usually laid across the main axis. So you can see here, if you try to look at our element here, which is this disk, maybe I should give it a border for the sake of everyone seeing what is happening. So let us give it a border of, let's say, 5 pixels solid green. So this element here that has the green border, of course, for you can't see, but for CSS, the browser can see that particular line, and even you yourself, you need to create that mental model that there is a line running from the top to the bottom of this element, which is what we refer to as the cross axis, and there's another line running from the left all the way to the right, and that line is referred to as the main axis. Okay, so all of your flex items are usually laid across the main axis. Of course, for us, we can't see it, but we have our nice visualization here, and we'll be using this all the time. Okay, so all of our elements, so by default, our elements, they were like this. Okay, they were going like this from the top to the bottom. Like this, they were like that going from the top to the bottom. Of course, just assume that they are inside there. They are inside our box over here. But when we gave our element a display property set to flex, it became a flex container. And the moment an element becomes a flex container, we have these two imaginary lines, the main axis and the cross axis. So all the elements are now usually laid across the main axis like that. So all the elements are arranged across the main axis like that. So for now, maybe let me just undo that. We will keep discussing that. So now we know about the main axis and the cross axis. Let us continue learning that. So the direction in which these flex elements are laid out is known as the main axis, which we've just seen. And then the other perpendicular axis is known as the cross axis. So again, remember I've told you guys, whenever you give an element a display property set to flex, it becomes flex container. And the moment an element becomes a flex container, then CSS knows about these two lines here, the main axis and the cross axis. The main axis is the one that is running from the left to the right, and that is the direction in which your flex items will be laid on. And then we have the cross axis running from the top to the bottom. Okay, so that is now the perpendicular direction. So those are two other important terms that we have learned there. And this is basically what you're talking about. So when you give your element a display property set to flex, it becomes a flex container. So this one is a flex container. Okay. And then all the direct children of flex container are what we refer to as the flex items. And then whenever you have a flex container, we have those two imaginary lines. One is running from the left all the way to the right. That is what we refer to as the main axis. And then we have another one that is running from the top to the bottom. That is what we refer to as the cross axis. Very important. If you've understood everything up until this point, you already have half of CSS Flexbox figured out. The moment you've just understood up what we've done so far, then half of Flexbox for you is figured out. So as you can see in the main axis, it's running from the left to the right, which means our elements are arranged from the left to the right. along the main axis. If the main axis points to the bottom, of which there is a way to make the main axis to point to the bottom, now your elements will run from the top to the bottom. You're going to see that in a short while. Now let us look at the flex container properties. We have the flex direction, which specifies the direction in which the main axis goes. Okay, so the flex direction property specifies the direction in which the main axis goes, and the default value is rho. So the default value is rho. As you can see, the main axis goes in this rho direction, but we have other values like rho reverse. So rho reverse will make the main axis go like this, which means now your items will be arranged from this end coming all the way to the left. So we have that row reverse. We have column and column reverse. So column means that your main axis will point to the bottom, which now means your items will be arranged from the top here, moving all the way to the bottom. And then we have column reverse, which means that your main axis is pointing to the top. And that means now your items will be arranged from the bottom, moving all the way to the top. Don't worry, guys, we'll keep looking at that, and we'll have a lot of examples of this until it will just make sense naturally. Next, we have flex wrap. So this flex wrap property defines if the items should wrap into a new line if there is not enough space in the flex container or not. So sometimes there is not enough space to fit all of these items in the flex container. So if the space is too small, we might decide that this box 10 starts on the next line, and so on and so forth, and then box 9 and and so on and so forth. So don't worry, guys, we are going to look at that in a short while. Next, we have justify content, which defines how the flex items will be aligned along the main axis. So this is your main axis. Where do you want to place these items? Do you want to leave them to the like the default here, the way they are? So that is what we refer to as justify items flex start. By the way, or do you want to put them to the center like this? Okay, maybe I should try to group these items here. Allow me. I don't know if there is a way I can group them. Just a second, guys. Let me see. Do we have an option to group? Yeah, exactly. We have an option to group. So the justify content defines, where is that? The justify content property. The justify content property defines how items will be aligned along the main axis. So the default value is flex start, which means your items are aligned here. But if you want, you can put your items to the center. Okay, you can put your items all the way to the end here. You can put some space around your item. We're going to see that when we get there. So we have all of those properties. And then we have the align items property, which defines how the items will be aligned along the cross axis. So align items defines how the items will be aligned along the cross axis, not the main axis. So the cross axis is now for the align items. So for this align content, we can leave it for now. And then now we have the flex item properties. So these flex item properties, they apply to the flex items themselves. So the properties that you have just looked at, for example, the flex direction and so on and so forth, they apply to the flex container, this green box over here. And then now we have the flex item properties, which now apply to the individual flex items, 1 all the way to 10. Okay, so the first one here is align self, which is very similar to align items, only that it applies to one individual flex item. Next, we have the order property, which defines the order in which one specific element should appear in the container. We have flex grow, flex shrink. We're going to look at those, and flex basis. We'll still look at those as time goes by. Now, guys, let me give you a secret, and that is just between the two of us, not the two of us, but those who are in this room. The two most important properties in Flexbox are, where are those? Yeah, here they are. Justify content and align items. I'm not saying that the others are not important. The others are equally important. But the VVIPs, maybe the VVVVIPs of these properties are justify content and align items. They are the most important properties. Of course, the other ones are also important, but the most important ones are justify content and align items. You'll basically see us using these two a lot of the times. Okay, so whenever you see these two, just know that the justify content property is used to align items along the main axis. And then we have the align items property. So just a second here, guys. Let me duplicate this multiple times, maybe 3 times. So the align items property, is used to align items along the cross axis. So justify content is for the main axis, okay, and then align items is for the cross axis. Okay, so we already have our code set up. Let us now look at this in details. So let us start with the flex container. So we said when we set the display property of the container to flex, then the elements will be aligned side by side, as we have seen. And you know why they are aligned side by side? It is because when you give an element the display property set to flex, the element itself will become a block level element, but all its children elements, they will become inline level elements. Okay, and of course, you know, inline level elements, they only occupy the amount of space that they need. As you can see in this case, they just want to occupy the 20 pixels, or rather the 40 pixels that we have defined. Okay, so that is the display property set to flex. And now here goes the most important one. So the flex direction property. Now the flex direction property, where is that? So the flex direction property, as we saw, it's used to set the direction of the main axis. Okay, and remember, all your items are aligned along the main axis. So the flex direction property defines the direction of the main axis, of which the default is row, meaning that the main axis runs from the left to the right, which means all your items will be arranged from the left all the way to the right, and that is basically the behavior we're seeing here, the default behavior. Now we also have another property here, not property, but another value for flex direction. Flex direction, we can do here row reverse. So when we do row reverse here, okay, when we do row reverse, now the main axis is running from the right all the way to the left, which means our items will be aligned from the right all the way to the left. And if we go back here to our page, that is basically what you can see. They're being aligned from the right all the way to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. And that is because now the main axis is running from the right all the way to the left, because we have set here row reverse. The default value is row. Okay, the default value is row, which makes the main axis to run from the left to the right, and thus our items are aligned from the left all the way to the right. Next, we have column. Okay, so when we set the flex direction property to be column, the main axis runs from the top to the bottom. When we set column, the main axis runs from the top to the bottom, which means even our items here, they will be, because remember, at any given point in time, the items are arranged along the main axis. So when we set the flex direction property to column, the main axis is now running from the top to the bottom, which means our items are arranged now from the top to the bottom. If you guys don't believe me, let us do here flex direction column, and if we save that and go back to our page here, you can see that is basically what is happening. So the main axis is running from the top to the bottom. That way our items are now being arranged from the top to the bottom. So by the way, when you're working with Flexbox, the only thing you need to understand is where the main axis currently is, or rather where it's running from and to. The moment you have that, it becomes very easy to understand these things. So that is column, and then you have another one called column reverse. So column reverse will make the main axis run from the bottom all the way to the top, like that. So that is column reverse. It will make your main axis run from the bottom all the way to the top. So very simple and very straightforward here. So if we do column reverse, our main axis is now running from the bottom to the top, which means that our items will be arranged from the bottom to the top, and that is what you can see here: 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, from the bottom to the top. So at any given point in time, just try to ask yourself where the main axis currently is. So if you can track, if you can mentally track where the main axis is, then you'll be more than good to go with Flexbox. So if you can mentally track where the main axis and the cross axis are, you know, Flexbox becomes very simple and very straightforward. Great. Next we have justify content. So justify content. wait. So yeah, so we had seen this justify content. So this justify content is used to define how the elements will be laid along the main axis. So remember, we've seen flex direction, which specifies the direction of the main axis. Now, justify content is going to decide how our elements are going to be arranged along the main axis. So let me just remove this column reverse. So remember, if we remove that, we now go back to the default, of which the default is row. And when the default is row, it means we are arranging from the left to the right. And that is basically what you can see here, arranging from the left to the right. So now the justify content property decides how we will arrange these elements on the main axis. Okay, so if we set by default, justify content is set to flex start, which means we are putting our elements to the start of the main axis. That is the default value. Justify content flex start, which means our items are put to the start of the main axis. They're put at the start of the main axis, as you can see. So that is the default value for justify content flex start. So the next value here is center. Of course, I think that explains itself. So all the items are aligned to the center of the main axis. So if we set justify content property to center, all the items will be put here to the center of the main axis. So justify content center, and now all of our items will be put to the center of the main axis. And of course, if you look at it, you can now see our items here 1 to 10, they are at the center of the main axis. Remember, the main axis runs from the left to the right currently, of course, because we're using the default. So that is justify content center. The next one is justify content space between. Okay, so justify content space between means that the available space is evenly distributed between the flex items. Okay, so space between will mean that the available space is evenly distributed between the flex items. So to visualize that easily, allow me to remove this margin for easy visualization, because that margin is going to confuse some of us. So I have removed the margin so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So we say justify content space between, then this is what CSS will do. It's going to divide the space equally among all of these items. So basically what will end up happening is that the space from one item to another will be equal. Okay, so the space from this space over here, this space here, this space will be equal as this space here. Okay, I'm really trying to illustrate this here. This space will be equal to this space over here. Okay, so the distance between the elements, yeah, actually that is what I was looking for. So when you use justify content space between, the distance between the elements is basically equal. So justify content space between. If we save that and we look at it, you can now see the distance between the elements is very much equal. So the distance from 1 to 2 is equal to the distance from 2 to 3, and it's equal to the distance between 3 and 4, and so on and so forth. Yes? Yeah, by default they were not equal. Tulikuwa tumeweka 10 pixels margin. Let me remove it. So by default we were using 10 pixels margin. That is why it was lying to you that they were equal. So we were using a margin of 10 pixels between the elements. That is why it was lying to you that they were equal. So that is the reason why I removed this margin. That way you see we are starting from scratch. And then when we set the justify content to be space between, then the space from one element to another becomes very much equal. So you can see the space from 1 to 2 is equal to the space from 2 to 3. The space from 2 to 3 is equal to the space from 3 to 4, and so on and so forth all the way to the end. Have I answered your question? Still confusing? Yeah. According to the flex container, yeah, exactly, guys. It is the space of the flex container, not the space of the entire browser or whatever. So it is the space of the flex container. Okay, basically, let me start with this. That way we are all moving together. In fact, let me remove that and also remove that. Okay, so this is what we have, and you can see we have all of this space here remaining. So when we say specify content to be space between, then that particular algorithm, that space between algorithm, it's going to divide this space here equally between these items to be placed between these items. Okay, so this space here that we're seeing, it will be split equally and space and placed between these items. Is it making sense now? Okay. So that is the justified content property set to space between. Now this the next one here, another variation of that space between that, and it's called space around. So for this space around, the distance to the left and to the right of each element will basically be equal. So if I say here space around, and I refresh this here, so the distance from here all the way to somewhere here is equal. Okay, let me just try to have the visualization here. Okay. So duplicate this and then copy that as well. Of course, I might not be able to get it accurate, but I'm just using this for explanation. So when you use justify content space around, then the distance here and here, okay, is going to be equal to, okay, what's happening now? So the distance around the element is going to be equal. Okay, what is happening here? I'm really trying to come up with something for explanation. What? Or like I should just copy this and paste it here. Just a second, guys. So when you use justify content space around, okay, so the distance outside the elements is going to be equal. Let me delete this and then instead use this one over here. Just group that, Control C, Control V. Yeah, exactly. So the distance around the elements is going to be equal. So if I copy and paste that, maybe that should be our last element. That is now what happens. So CSS looks for the space that is remaining, and then it makes sure that the distance around all of those elements is equal. And that is what we have here, as you can see. The distance around these elements are equal. The distance around the elements are very much equal. So that is the justify content space around. Great. So I hope we now understand what is happening here. Okay. So those were the properties that deal with aligning our content on the X direction. Let me just use here justify content space between. And by the way, let me just remove this justify content space between. You can see we have these items here very close to each other. Okay, so if you want to put some space between them, you can simply use the gap property. Let's say you don't want to use justify content or anything in those lines. You can just use the gap property and then provide an arbitrary value there. For example, you can use 20 pixels, and if we start and try to look at that, you can now see we have a gap of 20 pixels between each of those elements. By the way, guys, CSS Flexbox is extremely powerful. Like, it's dangerously powerful. If you just know how to use it, you'll basically be able to create any layout you want in the world. Okay, any layout you can ever think of can be done with CSS, Flexbox. Yeah, so that is what we have. So now I want us to look at the properties that deal with aligning our content, or rather aligning our items along the cross axis. No. They cannot work at the same time, because remember, the value space around space between, they are all values to this justify content. Okay, it's like trying to say, can you use text align and set center and justify at the same time? You see, it doesn't work that way. So are we together? Yeah. So let's just go back to our gap here of 20 pixels, and yeah, that is it about it. So the next property we are looking at is the property that deals with aligning items along the along the main axis. Sorry, not along the main axis, but along the cross axis. Now, there is no easy way to visualize that. There is no easy way to visualize this. So the easiest way for me to visualize aligning items along the cross axis is to basically have one of these items be taller than the other ones. Okay, so I can give, for example, this item 4 another class. By the way, an item can contain multiple classes. Sorry, I forgot to tell you this yesterday, but an HTML element can contain multiple classes. So I can give this here a class of item 4 as well. Okay, so you can see our element here has 2 classes. So this item 4, let me make it a bit more taller. Maybe give it a height of, let's say, 90 pixels or even 100 pixels, and that will help us to visualize the align items property. Okay, so yeah, let us now look at the align items property. So the best way to visualize working, yeah, of course, we've already done that. Okay, wait, align items, yeah. So align items, we've already done that. Okay, so as we say that the align items property is used to arrange items along the vertical axis, and the default value is supposed to be stretched. But even me, I'm surprised because this item, the way it has a height of the height of what, 100 pixels, even these other items are supposed to basically get that particular height, but it's okay. We're going to look at that in a short while. So the first value here for align items, okay, so the first value here for align items is flex start, which is basically what you guys can see here. Okay, you can see they're being aligned to the top of the cross axis. They're being aligned to the top of the cross axis, like that. We can also do flex end, and now those items will be aligned to the bottom of the cross axis, like that. So as you can see, our items, just imagine we have the cross axis running from the top all the way to the bottom here. And by the way, of course, these lines, they're not running across the entire page, okay? They're not running across the entire page. They're just running from where the element starts all the way to where the element ends. So for example, the main axis is only starting from here all the way to here, nothing more, nothing less. And even the cross axis is starting from here to here, nothing more, nothing less. If our items were very small, then that is basically how it would still work. So we've seen flex start, where the items are aligned to the top of the main axis. We've seen flex end, where the items are aligned to the bottom of the cross axis. We also have stretch, where the items are forced to be equal in size to the cross axis. So if we go back here, okay, I don't know why they're working, but these ones are supposed to be that tall. They're supposed to also go from the top to the bottom. Okay, maybe for somebody who's following along, for that particular person, theirs has stretched. Okay, I think I know why. Maybe this item 4 declaration should come here. Will that really work? Let me see, guys. Okay, that will not work. I don't know why it's not working, but either way, that is basically the idea. And then after stretch, the final value for align items is center. So if we put center, the items are going to be put to the center of the cross axis. If we put here center, so our cross axis is running from the top to the bottom, and now you can see that being put to the center of the cross axis. So we're using this number 4 to assume that that is our cross axis. Okay, so we're using that number 4 to assume that that is our cross axis. And now you've seen flex start, where we basically align that to the start of the cross axis. You've seen center, where we're aligning it to the center of the cross axis, and then flex end, which is aligning it to the end to the bottom of the cross axis. Now, there is another one. There's another value here which is very weird. I don't know how to explain it. I don't want to lie to you guys. Okay, so I don't want to lie to you guys. If I go to this item 4 and give it a font size of, let's say, 60 pixels, something like that. Okay, a very weird font size there. Okay, a font size of 60 pixels. I want you to see what happens when I use a value here called baseline. So align items baseline. So if I save that, I honestly can't explain. You can see it's not to the center, but it's like trying to work with this number 4. I've never understood it, and Makosa Nyango, I'm supposed to do my own research, but you guys will do yours. Okay, so now we are done with the flex container. So next, let us now look at the at the flex items themselves. Okay, so let us look at the flex items themselves, and here we just want a bunch of them, not too many. So this align self, it overrides the align items property for an individual flex item. So for example here, we can say align items property. We can set the align items property here to be center. Align items property, we can set that to be center here. Okay, we can set that align items property to be center. But what if we don't want this number 10 here to be to the center? Okay, so we can use the align self property to override it. So you can say here item 10, and then you can use the align self property to override it. So dot item 10, and then align self. We can say, for example, flex start. Okay, and if we save that and look at it, you can now see we have overridden the align items property for this individual flex item. Okay, we can also set it to be flex, and essentially what you want will work perfectly fine, as you can see. Now let us now start looking at the powers of Flexbox. The next property here is the order property. So elements don't have to appear, your elements don't have to appear the way they have been defined in HTML. Okay, we can have, for example, this first element here, this item number 1 appearing the last one, or we can have item number 8 appearing the first one, and that is the power of Flexbox. So for that, we use the order property. So Flexbox orders all the elements according to their order number in ascending order. So the default value for all the elements is 0, and elements with a lower order number are shown in the beginning. So the default value for order for all of these elements, they have a default order value, and value for that is 0. Sorry, not order value, but a default order property, and the value for that is 0. That is why they are appearing the way they are coming in HTML. But I could decide to give this item 10 an order. Okay, I can give it an order of, say, -1. So if I give it an order of -1, remember we've said items with the least value in terms of order, they are shown at the beginning. So if I come back here, you can now see this item number 10 is shown to the start. Okay, yet in the source code, in our HTML, it is appearing as the last one. So even this item number 4, I can give it an order of, let's say, an order of -2. And of course, -2 is less than -1. That is basic mathematics. So now you can see this item number 4 is appearing the first one. Order, that is the order property. Next, we have the flex grow property. So this flex grow property gives an item the ability to grow. Okay, it gives the element an ability to grow. So you're supposed to specify an integer value which will be used as the ratio, because as you can see currently, we have a lot of space here. Okay, so where should that space go to? So that is where the flex grow property comes into play. So in case there is an extra space, okay, how should these elements grow to basically occupy that particular space? So for example, for this item number 10, I can give it a flex grow property of, let's say, something 1, and if I save it, you can now see it is the one that is growing to occupy all of that space. So let us try to give this item number 10 item number 10. Yeah, so let us also try to give this item number 4 a flex grow property of 1 and see what will happen. You can now see CSS is dividing that space equally among these two items. But you can also decide to tell CSS this one should grow twice as faster, or rather it should grow twice as much to occupy the remaining space as this item 10. And now if you try to look at it, you can see this item 4, it's quite bigger than this item 10, according to the calculations being done here by this CSS algorithm. Okay, so that is the flex grow property. It defines how an element should grow. And then we have the flex shrink, which is basically the opposite of flex grow. Now the next one here is flex basis, which is used to set the width of a flex item. So the flex basis property is used to set the width of a flex item. So for this item 4, for example, we can give it a flex basis of, let's say, 200 pixels. So that item is going to be 200 pixels in size. Okay, of course it's hard to visualize. Let us try to give it a width of, let's say, 20 pixels to be half the other ones. So a flex basis of 20 pixels, and as you can see, that is working perfectly fine. And then now our final property here is the flex shorthand. So this flex shorthand, it takes the grow, shrink, and basis all together. We can just ignore those for now. Okay, do we have any questions? Do we have any questions? So maybe we can look at one more topic. So this CSS Flexbox was the most important one. I wanted to go through it before you guys start sleeping. That way, the least important ones can come afterwards. Okay, so do you have any questions? Okay, I want us to look at the CSS transitions. Okay, do we need to look at this one right now? I'm trying to think. Okay, just a second, guys. Let me share my screen. Okay, the remaining ones, the remaining topics, we're going to cover them as we build our project. So when we come across something that needs that particular topic, we'll be doing the necessary. Okay, so for now, let me show you the project we'll be building. Let me first of all stop presenting my screen. That way you don't see some things you're not supposed to see. Do we have Steven in this class? Kuna Steven hapa ndani? Okay. So just a second, guys. I want to show you what we'll be building today and tomorrow. Internet inasumbua, but it's still okay. Can you guys see my screen? Is my screen visible? Yeah, so from today in the afternoon, we will be working on this small web page here. Is that a question? Hey, are you asking a question or are you talking to who? Okay, so this is what we'll be working on today from the afternoon all the way to tomorrow. So it's basically this simple web page. It's called Host Club. So Host Club is a landing page, or rather basically an advertisement page for a fictional, company that deals with horses. I don't know why I came up with horses instead of cats or even dogs, but either way, just something for a small project. So this is that project, Host Club, and this is what it looks like. So you can see we have our header and our navigation here. We'll come back to that. So this is what we usually call the hero section. Okay. So if you're taking some notes, you can write that somewhere. And I'm not making this up. You can literally Google what is the hero section of a web page. So the hero section of a web page, yeah, you can see a hero section. So a hero section is the first visual element users see on a website, typically located at the top of the page. Okay, so it plays a crucial role in establishing your brand identity, communicating your core message, and driving user engagement. So you can see here, we have our hero section. So if somebody sees here introducing Host Club, interrelation between horses and riders, they get an idea of what this web page is about. And then if we scroll here, you can see the navigation is sticking up there. And then we have this section here where we talk about what we do in this Host Club company. Of course, I'm just using dummy text, but when we get there, we'll basically build this out all together. Okay, and then after that, we have the services section. So basically, under this services section, these are the services that are being offered by this Host Club company. Okay, you can say, for example, veterinary services, horse grooming, horse training, horse feeding, a sanctuary for horses, digital tracking, and so on and so forth. And basically, when I put my mouse on any of these services, you can see we get this nice effect over here. Okay, And yeah, we'll keep looking at that. And then next after that, we have here some of the reasons why somebody should pick our company over maybe other. Do we really have anything like a host company? Okay, whatever that is. But you can see here we have some reasons why somebody should pick our company over other companies when it comes to their hosts. After that, we have the team section. So these are basically the team members. Okay, so we have Irene Mutuku, who is the CEO and the founder, and here we have some links that go nowhere. So link to their Instagram, to their X, to their Facebook, and if you want to learn more about them, you can Google about them. Okay, Brian Zioka, Pablo. Okay, so all of these are the staff of the host club company, alongside what they basically do in that in this organization. And then after that, we have the blog section here. Okay, so we have the blog, and as you can see here, we have under each blog we have this. They're usually called chips, and I'm not making this up. You can literally Google how to make a chip in CSS. How to make chips. Okay, how to make, is it, are they called chips? But I'm going to talk about all of those jargons, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, you can see here what I'm talking about. They're usually called chips. Let me just zoom this in. That way you see the preview of what we have here. Okay. So those are what we refer to as chips. Okay, we'll get back to that later on. I'm just trying to show you what we'll be building. And at that time, I will be discussing all of the technical jargons. So this is the blog part. Okay. And you can see the blog contains the date that that particular blog was written and the author. Of course, if you click on this URL, the blog will not do anything. It will not open anywhere, but I think you'll get the idea here. And then after that, we now have the footer. So I'll also discuss what we mean by the footer. So built with lots of love by Dennis Otuomo. Of course, if you click this, it's going to open my GitHub repo. So that is it about it. And now, as you can see, we also have these links over here. So we said an anchor tag. An anchor tag can be used to navigate within a website or outside of a website. So we have here one anchor tag that is navigating outside of the website. But for example, if I want to go to the About section, I can click on About and it will scroll to the About section like that. I can click on Services and it will go to the Services section. I can click on Home and it will go to the Home section like that. I can click on Team and you can see it's going to the Team section, Blog, why you should choose us, Services, and so on and so forth. Okay. And even here at the top, you can see we have some contact information, a nice logo, and so on and so forth. So we are going to build this project together. I feel like we've been doing a lot of theory, so it's time to put this to practice, and then you're also going to have your own assignment. And in building this, we will basically come across some new HTML tags which you've never seen before. Okay, so that is the fun and the project. That is the fun in doing projects. So we'll come across some HTML tags which you've never seen before. Okay, and I will also come across, some CSS that you've not done before. For example, right now, as you can see in this case, when I put my mouse on this service, you see this effect here happening. Okay, when I put a mouse on an individual service, you can see that effect happening. And even when I put my mouse on the About, for example, you can see it's changing the color. When I put my mouse on these services, you can see it's changing its color, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we will learn all of that CSS. So there's still a lot to learn. I'm hoping you guys are excited for that. Let me send you this URL. That way you are all ready for this when we get there. Okay, so just a second. Okay, actually, I know where to get the URL, so no worries about it. Do we have any questions up until that point? Any questions? Sorry. So let me send you the URL of what we will be working on. So we'll start from the complete scratch. Okay, we'll start from complete scratch, and then we will build it from there moving forward. Okay, if we don't have any questions, I think we can break for lunch, right? Yeah. So by 2 p.m., please make sure you are here. That way we have enough time to work on this. So. And by the way, I've forgotten to show you something. Just one more thing, sorry. There is something you're also going to learn, something called responsive web design. Let me just share my screen once again. Sorry, I forgot to show this to you guys. So we're also going to learn something known as responsive web design. I hope you guys can see my screen. So right now, for example, if I inspect this, okay, you will see that this is what our website will be looking like on various devices. Okay, I don't know what zoom level are we using here. I don't want to. Yeah, 50% is okay. So for example, if I go for an iPhone SE, okay, so I want you to look at what it's looking like on a laptop. So you can see, for example, this section on a laptop, this section will look like this, and even the services section. But on an iPhone SE, for example, you can see the layout is changing. Okay, the layout is changing on Galaxy Z Fold 5, which is basically the smallest device. You can see we also end up getting this different type of a layout here. Okay, so that is what we refer to as responsive web design. And when we get there, you guys are going to see what we mean by that. And then one more thing before we for lunch, I forgot to talk about the flex wrap property. Right now, as you can see, when I inspect this, okay, when there is no enough space, you can see CSS is forcing all of these items to fit to that. It's forcing all of these items to fit to that particular container. But there's a property called flex wrap. Okay, if I set here, and we usually set that particular property on the flex container. So if I set here flex wrap to be wrap like that and save this, okay, so now what will happen is that when there is no enough space, these items will start going to the next line. So look at what happens when there is not enough space. You can see they're going to the next line. Okay, so that's usually very important when it comes to responsive web design. Okay, so basically now you can already feel how this particular section, for example, has been implemented. So if I try to inspect this, and okay, this is not too small. That's unrealistic. We don't have a device that small ever in the world. Okay, but as you can see, when there is enough space, we can show two of them. But when there is not enough space, they are wrapping to the next line. So in the afternoon, we'll start building that project, learning new concepts, and basically practicing along the way. I've sent you the link. Of course, it's not perfect. There are still some things that need to be worked on that webpage, but when we get there, we will definitely take a look at it. Have a wonderful lunch, guys. I'll see you at 2 p.m. Ikifika 2.
Sasa npm install npm install wiki ilikuwa npm install npm net bits lazima download ya maana kwa hiyo hapa name yani function yangu yenye nataka andika kama name CSS na name tu yes system yani pale nataka kucreate hiyo folder najua hiyo process ni kucreate folder ukifanya hii process bando ni ati na create sasa tujaribu init vite andika zenyewe zimedhurua hela, lakini I think kwa nini, lakini I think maybe kuna mahali tumefanya hapana, maybe kwa hizo command alikuwa nasema tukiwa tunafanya mara ya kwanza ndio tunapaswa kufanya hivyo ama ndio alisema eh,